Two planes, two chip breakers. One for this plane set very fine, 0.5 millimeter.
64th of an inch.
This plane, 16th of an inch.
About 2 millimeters.
Let's see what they could do with this.
Tight chip breaker first. And chip breaker set back. Whoa!
Hi, I'm Bank from Bank Construct, and today we're looking at the chip breaker to see how we can improve the surface of the wood and where the position of it is best placed, and even the angle of the actual chip breaker itself. Okay, let's get with it. So let's quickly break it down and see exactly what we're looking at. And this is the guy. What I'm looking at there is this, how much that moves up and down. But I'm also looking at what the angle of that tip is. So in other words, that's what I'm looking at there now. Now, as you notice, the actual stamp that's left in, and when it comes to you from the factory, it's going to be about 40, 42 or 43 degrees. And normally, a lot of people recommend you file that and polish it up there to 45. Now, I would instigate that you should go to a higher angle than that, and it creates a much better shearing effect and a compression effect on the fibers as you're cutting. You'll notice on the new ones that they actually come nearly the same as a blade, a 25-degree angle. And that's because they've left it for you to decide what angle you need on that leading edge. So let's have a look at this again, and we'll see what that angle is now.
As you see here, it's the basic stamped angle you get from the factory, 45 degrees.
But that's not what this has been filed to. As you see there, there's an extra angle added in, which on this chip breaker is just under 70 degrees.
And that 70-degree angle is exactly the same as what I've honed on the new style chip breaker. And you note it doesn't actually have to be more than 2 or 3 millimeters.
But let me say this one thing, if you're planing with the grain of the wood, or you're planing straight grained wood, a chip breaker is not actually required. And to prove this, and I'm going to demonstrate it now, I'm actually going to remove the actual chip breaker completely off a plane and demonstrate that. Let's have a look at that.
There's a slightly unusual configuration for some of the Veritas planes, but it does allow me to demonstrate this quite easily, as the carriage is locked to the actual blade and doesn't need a chip breaker.
And a piece of pine which has got a straight grain.
Let's see how this does without any chip breaker in it. We'll take a couple of swipes. And as you can see here, not a problem on it. Absolutely no problem at all.
Piece of oak here with the grain we're going to plane with.
And again, absolutely no problem at all.
But let's not get too sidetracked with that. It's not going to be long before we have to plane over a knot, as you see the grain pulling up over the back of the knot, often where you get your tear back, or on this piece of mahogany which has got a reversing grain in it, or you just have a simple bit of figure in any kind of wood. You're going to need that chip breaker. So let's get into it now. How close should that chip breaker go, and what angle should the tip of it be? To do this best, it's easiest to go to a drawing, and we're going to show a little study of how the shavings pass over the chip breaker and what effect it does have. The first sketch here, you have your wood down below here, your blade here, and your shaving coming off. And we are currently planing with the grain. As we know, this is not really a problem. All the angles we're going to use for the blade will be at 45 degrees. And then we're going to go against the grain, and immediately you can see this is where the trouble starts, and you've got your clubs of timber being taken out, and as the blade pushes along, it's actually damaging the fibers in front of it. No chip breaker on this one. Let's introduce a 30-degree chip breaker and see what that does. We set it at 2 millimeters or 1/16 of an inch approximately, and you can see as the shavings come up, they're not really being interfered with, they're not changing anything, and accordingly a tear out is just as bad. So let's squeeze that up to 1 millimeter, and you can see it's really not doing very much. It's just the angle is not steep enough to give any kind of compression to the shavings to stop it damaging in front and leaving this mess behind. So there we go. We've got the 30 millimeter chip breaker in. We've closed it up to 0.5 millimeter. It's having some effect, but it's still leaving damage, still interfering with flow, and still we're getting that shearing effect. And just to show you what I mean by shearing, thus you can fairly clearly see how the tear out occurs. But by compressing the grain as we cut through, that's really what the chip breaker is doing.
Other systems that we already use to control tear out is, one of them is with the shooting board. But as you know, with this shooting board, by placing the timber up and creating a compression behind the timbers, it stops it from shearing away. So let's take that 30-degree chip breaker, and we're going to move it into less than 0.5 millimeter and see if that helps us. And as you'll notice here, it certainly does help us. That's basically about 0.2 millimeters or 128th of an inch less than 0.5 millimeter. And the problem you've got with this is that it's not going to be very easy. If you've got any kind of camber on your blade, such as this demonstrates it, by the time you get anywhere near 0.2 of a millimeter, your chip breaker is going to be digging in. So that's not going to be much use trying to get it at that. And plus you probably need a magnifying glass to actually just see what a 0.2 of a millimeter actually is. 128. It's not really discernible to the eye. Let's move on now, and we'll look at a 45 millimeter chip breaker, which we're going to bring into 1 millimeter. And now you can see there's an awful difference in the angle here. Let's just flash back for a second and see that big difference. Only 15 degrees, but
you can see the effect straight away. As we're planing in this direction, it's nearly going perpendicular to the direction of the plane, and immediately you can see the compression that's created by that, and that's compounding the shaving back into it, and you're getting very little kind of shearing effect again going on there, and you're getting an improvement in the cut altogether when you're going against the grain. Something like 1mm might be good enough for dealing with a knot going over a pine on a softwood, but it's unlikely that it'll take care of something like an oak with a swelling grain, or where you've got a actual knot in it. You're going to get tear out behind the knot still. So what do we do with that? Well, we'll close it in again, and this time we're showing the diagram with a 0.5mm between the chip breaker and the blade tip, and you can see the compression there going on. A lot of compression, keeping it tight to the cutting edge of the blade and not allowing it to sever or shear away, and a very much vastly improved surface area. And then if we take that and we move it into 0.2 of a millimeter, well, yes, but we know what the problem is with this. There's it's very hard to get a 0.2 of a millimeter, 128. It's nearly discernible to the eye, as we said. But let's just for a second have a look at the difference in what is a millimeter and what is 0.5mm. Now I've got two of them set here, and if I could just catch that in the light for you. There we go. There's your 1mm, and there's your 0.5mm. Both quite, they're quite discernible. And all you're really going to do to achieve that is just to loosen off the screw a fraction, and just tap away at the back of it or in the hole there until you get it up to where you want that to be the 0.5mm. And that's how that's achieved, and it's not such a hard thing to do either, So now let's have a look. Now, if we increase the degree of the chip breaker, and I'm going to show you what a 70-degree chip breaker looks like, and you can notice a big difference there straight away. Quick comparison back to the 45, which runs perpendicular to the surface it's going along. 70 is nearly perpendicular to the actual surface of the blade where it's cutting. But as you can see, at only 1mm or 1/32 of an inch, the compression is working much more severely. You're getting a bulge here, a lot of pressure there on the cut before, and it's not allowed to separate. A vastly improved surface immediately at 1mm before we've gone anywhere near a 0.5mm. And then if we do squeeze it into a 0.5mm, this is what you're going to be looking at then. Quite a severe bulging, a sharp difference in the surface, no real tear out, a much improved surface. And with that, you could use a blade like this, provided it's sharp, into taking on something like that with a piece of oak in it. Where it's either swirling grain, or you're going across the grain, or you're going over a knot. And you can expect, if you've sharpened your blade correctly, you can expect to get a good surface out of a blade like that, 0.5mm. There are some of the differences in the angles, and let's just have a quick summary as to what we're saying here, because we're certainly not saying that you have to use a 70-degree, but what we are saying is that if you increase the blade angle from the 45 perpendicular angle further higher to a higher angle, you are going to have a better effect on compressing the shavings and improving that surface behind, and not allowing a shearing effect to be going at the end of the tip of the blade. And for general use, 1mm or a 32nd of an inch would seem about right to keep your chip breaker away from the blade tip. And then if you're
having trouble or getting tear out, then just tap it forward until you get maybe a 0.5 millimetre or a 64th of an inch. And that should take care of most tear out issues, certainly on softwoods, and you can go a bit tighter than that, of course, but we know what the problems are with going too tight and the chip breaker digging in rather than the blade. Other things you should consider would be the blade, the chip breaker clearance angle. What am I talking about? We're talking about the underside of the chip breaker. Namely just there, you see there's a gap. And that gap ensures that the tip is touching against the blade the whole way along. Immaculately is what it should be. The top should be polished to a high degree. You only have to do it once. It doesn't actually take very long. It's quite a softer metal. And the same underneath. That face there on the bottom side of the chip breaker should be polished and certainly flat, so that it guarantees the tight fit between the two. To polish that surface, it's simple as this. You create a platform lower than the face of the sharpening stone or diamond stone, which matches the relief angle of the chip breaker. And that will allow you to either sharpen that way or this way. And if you find with the jig that it's you can't get to a high enough angle because it's interfering on the bottom, an easy way to do that then is just to cut yourself a piece of timber for whatever angle you want. It doesn't have to be again 70, and by placing the blade against that, it will allow you to cut. And as I say, take that through to 1,000, 4,000, even 10,000 if you wish. It should be polished properly, and so should the bottom side of it. You only have to kind of do it once every 3 or 4 years, and it doesn't really take very long. It's not that hard a metal. And yes, you're going to find that that is actually sharp, and it should be sharp, quite frankly. If you want a perfect match, it has to be sharp if you want to maintain that angle. There's no getting away from it. So in reality, you've got 2 sharp blades now instead of 1, but that's the way it should be done. Other things you might consider trying is shallowing the cut of the depth of the blade, so you get a shallower cut. That often is a good idea with hardwood, certainly. And always keep that blade sharp. That is a big secret of it. When you go for the more difficult grains, you need a sharp blade. Anyway, that about finishes for today. Thanks for watching, and comments are welcome, and a thumbs up are always welcome. Thank you. Apologies to the guys who normally call the chip breaker the cap iron. I know that is probably the correct terminology for it, but I just find the chip breaker comes much better to hand, and I can't be swapping over then when I'm trying to do a demonstration. Okay, have a good day. Bye.
And if you found this video of interest, you may also like to see my other video on tearout, which goes into different systems and ways of avoiding this problem. Link in the description.